Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back, everybody, to our podcast, SIAM in Action, with real people and real stories. In today's podcast, episode 3, we will be talking about the investment perspective, the business case of service integration and management. I am your host, the curious SIAM enthusiast, Neha Jain, and I'm thrilled to have all of you join us for today's podcast. The exciting part when we talk about business case is understanding what is the investment we are asking for from our customers. What value will it bring to the customer? What role would they play? How do we get derailed? We are going to cover all of these topics with a wonderful set of panelists today. And it gives me an immense pleasure to host the esteemed experts. First is the HDI's top 25 thought leader, Michelle Major-Goldsmith. She is a recognized leader in service integration and management. She is a champion of Scopism community and one of the original architects of SIAM's body of knowledge. In the past, she has been IT SMF Australia's thought leader and service management champion of the year. Michelle, it's lovely to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Neha. Really excited to talk to everybody on the session today.
Great. Joining Michelle is Gail D'Souza, with 15 years in business of translating services into value for our customers to transform their service delivery. Her favorite challenge to date have been to apply the principles of ITSM and SIAM to non-IT related problems. Welcome, Gail.
Thanks for having me, Neha, in esteemed company. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Super. And we have Anand Kumar, a known speaker with over 2 decades of championing and building integrated solutions for customers across diverse customer industries for cloud, ITSM, and SIAM solution. He is a strong advocate of SIAM's evolution with changing times and technologies, and he wants to ensure that the organizations can effectively manage and integrate their services and provider in this ever-changing landscape. Welcome, Anand.
Thank you, Neha. Looking forward to the session. I know it's going to be exciting. Thank you.
Brilliant. Fantastic to have you all. So, for our audience, those who are listening in, when we are talking about the investment perspective, it is only fair to understand what is the market size, what is the investment pool that we are focusing on across the globe. So, what is the target addressable market for service integration and management? If we have to look at that, let's break it down from top to bottom. The entire size of IT services market is approximately 1.4 to 1.5 trillion. I'm talking about 2024-25 numbers. Now, talking about this IT market, I'm not talking about the entire 4-5 trillion of IT market. I'm talking about IT service, right, which is 1.4. Out of that, we can assume that we have around 300 billion, which is IT managed services, which is being managed by the various providers. And when we do the RFP analysis and the contract analysis that we sign with the customers across, easily 5 to 15% of this 300 billion is the service integration business. Applying that 15% to the 3 billion of the market size, we can estimate the top-down analysis of just the service integration and management market would be anywhere between 35 billion upwards, right? And this is the current year and the previous year that I'm talking about. Of course, the market is increasing, the CAGR is increasing year by year. Now, let's soak in that number. I'm taking a very modest number of 35 billion based on this top-down analysis of our entire service integration management. Any guesses on what is the estimation which is provided by the famous market analysts who reports onto this number? It's not 35 billion. The market estimate today for the structured service integration and management market today is varying between 4.8 to 6.12 billion. Where has that 30 billion gone? Any thoughts, any explanations from our panel?
It's wow, isn't it, Neha? I mean, this is it's a really valuable and timely conversation, because when you set the stage so clearly, it gives us something fantastic to talk about. I think what's quite interesting is this gap between the potential SIAM market and the reported size. It's quite striking, really, when you think about it. But for me, it sort of highlights the current gaps in the maturity and the recognition of SIAM. I mean, it's not really whether SIAM is happening as far as I'm concerned. It's more about, how is it identified? How is it valued? How is it structured? I think there's a lot of activity in there, but it's buried between a broader transformation or maybe outsourcing effort. And I think probably it's not explicitly labeled or funded. And that's a challenge, isn't it? It's a visibility challenge, it's a value articulation challenge, it's an ownership challenge, clear accountability, who's responsible for SIAM. So I think this is a really great opportunity to help organizations reframe what they're already doing, but give SIAM structure and intent, and really help them to think about building those stronger business cases that help to understand what SIAM is, and therefore really be able to talk about it from a value perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if I can add to that. Sorry, I was going to add to that, Michelle. I think for my experience so far is that the business cases are typically not articulated or poorly articulated, because there's that lack of understanding, what is SIAM and how does it work? And we see that in the, in those figures there.
Yeah, absolutely. Anand, your thoughts?
Yes, certainly. I completely agree with Michelle and Gail. A couple of observations that I have as well as to why we haven't maybe tapped into this is primarily around the lack of understanding maybe on the impact of not having a well-established service integration within a customer organization, right? So a lot of times we probably do not realize what we're losing out because it's not there, right? So, one interesting report that I read a little while ago from Clio, which is a supply chain company, was that year on year, they have been noticing customers losing a lot more than what they were previously, primarily because lack of stronger governance and integration, right? So it could range anywhere between 500K to $1 million of IT spend on an annual basis for each customer. And apparently every time they've done these analyses year on year, there are more customers who've been complaining about similar situations, right?
Yeah, that's a striking gap.
Absolutely. A couple of additional observations again have been, from my experience, is that a lot of times when companies or customers outsource, there is an assumption that the lead service provider is going to manage the integration as well, right? Especially when we have gone back and spoken to unhappy customers, we always understand that, oh, there is a glaring gap. I mean, they're not doing it in-house. They have not explicitly outsourced this to anybody, but there is an assumption that, hey, you know what? Service provider X, you're managing 70% of my environment. We expect you to go do the integration as well, right? So that's another way we're losing out on the potential opportunity for, like to what Michelle said, categorizing SIAM as an independent identity and have the associated, business stack to it, right? And lastly, though a lot of customers these days are using external consultants to help with their RFPs and whatnot, they seem to be doing slightly better, but there is still that lack of understanding of how much of control, what do they want to keep in-house, what do they really want to outsource, right? From a control, governance, and integration point of view. So these are some of my observations, which probably can talk about why do we have the gap of what's reported against the opportunity that's available.
Makes 100% sense what you said. And this consistent gap of understanding in the fundamental need and value for service integration and management is often talked about even in our previous episodes. Michelle, if I could ask you, is your approach in addressing the reason for establishing SIAM's value proposition?
It's a great question, Neha. I think what I consistently see is this sort of gap in understanding, as I said before. So it's not just about implementation, but it's sort of right at the start. It's, how do organizations even frame their need for SIAM? Because from my experience, it shows up in tenders and bid responses in terms of a sort of a request, but it's quite vague, it's quite misaligned. Customers are often asking for a service integrator, but then when you look at the scope of what they're asking for, it's more aligned to things like, direct IT service management or contract ownership, fancy contract ownership. And they don't really articulate the outcomes they want to achieve. So it makes it difficult to sort of even craft a response, for a customer, because it's really, really hard for us to understand what those outcomes should be and what they should look like. So, I'd really like to take the conversation right back to the business case, which is what we're talking about today. What is the why behind SIAM? Because without that clarity right up front, right at the start in the proposal and the bid stage, I think you can't even build the SIAM model. You can't measure value. You can't succeed, essentially.
Right. And Gail, what are your thoughts? Why does organizations skip this crucial aspect?
Look, I'll be honest, I think when organizations are considering SIAM, they're often doing so on the advice of an external consultant, helping them to write their RFP. And those external consultants might also not really understand what SIAM is, other than, oh, we need SIAM because we've got multiple service providers and therefore we should use it. So I guess through the RFP process, they failed to clearly define what the outcomes are that they're looking for. And then they're missing that why or that common frame of reference, to address the challenges, and to make sure that they're measuring the integrator properly, and that the integrator's got a clear mandate, I suppose, of what they're trying to achieve. So without that business case, I've seen the customers become really frustrated at what's been provided. They sort of tend to finger point at the integrator. The integrator feels blamed for the situation, even though they're there to try and help solve the problems. And then the business loses faith in IT because they don't seem to know what they're doing either. So there's this terrible circle. Sometimes I even think, rather than SIAM being part of the IT organisation, it's almost at that whole business level that we should be looking at it.
Couldn't
So I
agree
guess,
more. Yeah.
yeah, I think when we're putting together those RFPs, or when we're putting together why we need SIAM, we just need to take a step back and say, what is it we're trying to improve here? Is it customer satisfaction, operational efficiency? Are we just trying to manage the sourcing complexity of our organisation? And once we understand that, then we can start to build a business case for SIAM and the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and tie the investment to that, through a managed program of activity to try and transform the business into a new way of working.
That's a
So,
very
yeah, I don't know if
interesting aspect, Gail. So as you mentioned, that the business at the beginning itself skips this step, and we do not establish what's the expected outcome and who is expected to deliver that. Michelle, you have any thoughts on how business case can build these gaps and fix them?
Yeah, I mean, I think we often think that a business case, is just a funding document. We forget the power of a business case. It can actually be something that supports a customer right the way through the journey. So For me, I often talk about it as, the compass, if you like. I don't understand why organizations skip this step, essentially. It's the compass for the journey. So it defines the drivers. Gail mentioned some of those before. It sets your expectations. It creates a baseline for really measuring that value that I alluded to previously. And without it, I think you really risk implementing a really complex operating model with no shared understanding of what you're actually doing or what good looks like. So I think many organizations skip this step because they confuse activity with strategy. They know they've got these service delivery issues. They've got too many providers, or maybe they want to establish control themselves. But they don't pause to determine, what are our actual drivers from a SIAM point of view? For example, do I want better governance? Do I want improved service satisfaction? Do I want, better operational efficiency or reduced complexity in my sourcing? Without really sitting down and going, what are those business drivers? What do they mean to my organization? You can't make a value-based judgment on whether SIAM is actually right for you. Or what kind of SIAM model is going to best serve your organization. So I often find that, that part gets skipped. People think that they want SIAM. They don't really know why they want it. They've maybe heard it from somewhere, or an analyst has said it's a great idea. And we sort of lose visibility of that crucial step, that compass, as I alluded to before.
Interesting thought. They think they want it, but they don't know why.
Yeah.
So, Gail, would you mind probably sharing, as a consultant, how do you go about building this business case and ensuring that the components are thought through when you're building the business case?
Yeah, look, I think understanding what the business's outcomes are, not just IT outcomes, but the business value is important. So involving all aspects of the business, understanding what the pain points are, talking about timeframes and budgets, external influences. I think it's good to set expectations with your customer that this is not just a one-stop project and then that's it. We've got SIAM. It's a bit of a journey, right? It's a roadmap, and that's going to take ongoing investment. So setting expectations around not just the fact that there is an investment, it's going to be an ongoing investment to mature your operating model and to make sure that SIAM's going to deliver those outcomes that you're looking for. So yeah, it's a series of workshops. It's making sure that we clearly define what's the business value, and articulating that in business terms. What are the outcomes you deliver for your customers, and then how can we help you build your business internally to deliver those outcomes for your customers? Because if you're presenting this business case, let's say it's from IT to up in the business to get the sourcing of funding that you need, to make it relevant to them or valuable to them, you need to articulate in their terms, not in IT terms, which only makes it look like you're trying to do your business more efficiently, rather than
You're bringing in some really valuable point here, right? You're talking about ensuring that you talk in the business language. I would like to put a pin on this thought and would circle back during this podcast on that particular topic. It's an important one. And I would just go back and Anand, if you would be able to help us in walking us through any example of creating a business case, what does it consist of? If you can give us a few pointers on that.
Absolutely, but it's going to be a bit of a repeat to what Michelle and Gail mentioned. They were spot on. Let me start with maybe giving an example of what a business case should not contain or limited to, right? A lot of times, again, to echo some of the thoughts that were said, the idea is, oh, you know what, somebody wants a business case, let me just put something together. So the focus is invariably always on or limited to, hey, look, we can save X percentage of your cost, right? And a lot of times, again, as a service provider, if we're not understanding our customers' business problems, their strategies, the business case is going to be so focused on the operational aspects, saying that, hey, look, we can help you stop X number of
Yeah.
change failures. We can maybe help you reduce Y number of your tickets and all of it, right? I think the most important thing is to be able to ask, so what? Yeah. And get that to be able to translate into a business perspective. That's been a common trend in whenever I have seen a business case where it's too delivery centric, too low level, and not really resonating with your business audience because they want to understand how is going to help the business to move forward, right? So now, that's what you don't want to do with the business case. Let's talk a
Yeah.
little bit about what do we want to do with it, right? Again, to repeat what Michelle and Gail said, the first thing is clarify your drivers, right? Understand your problems, and more importantly, ask yourself the question, is this a problem that the business wants to be solved, right? There could be 100 problems. You're not going to go out and solve all 100 of them. It's important to understand that, okay, out of these 100, how many of these are genuinely having a negative impact on my business, or maybe a potential opportunity for my business to do better? So that becomes your set of drivers, right? Ask your question that this is what the business will invest money in to go fix it. So we start with clarifying your drivers, right? Step two, to add a little bit more impact to it. Now that we have clarified the drivers, let's talk a little bit about what's the positive impact it is going to have on my business, right? You're not looking at from an IT point of view. You're not looking at on a day-to-day operations point of view. You're trying to really translate that into business benefits. So that is what's going to help you catch your audience's attention. Yeah. Third, this is something that many skip, but I genuinely think it's important. A risk assessment. What do I mean when I say a risk assessment is, yes, I've told you what is good if you're able to invest and fix things. Let me also tell you, if you don't fix this, if you don't invest in SIAM, what is the loss or the impact that you are going to have? I think that's going to really hit the nail on the head, because that's when people will realize, oh, so if I'm not doing this, I'm either losing out on so much of an opportunity, or I'm losing out on XYZ negative impact that seems to be a recurring theme as such, right? Now that we have
Right.
established these, I think it's important to go out and say, what is the investment that we are asking for, right? I think that's really important. You can't just walk into one of these meetings and say, hey, look, I'll do X, Y, Z, but not really tell them what is the investment that is required. And also talk about the timeline of the investment, right? Do you want these investment upfront? Do you want these investment 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, and all of it? I genuinely feel having a phased approach for investment, especially if it's at a higher volume, is going to be extremely important, right?
Yep.
Also, quickly touch upon what the roles are going to be, what the customer themselves are going to be doing. What are the responsibilities that we are going to hand over to an external service provider? And
Yep.
lastly, clearly talk about, I love the statement which Michelle said, that should be a compass, right? So let's define your metrics. Let's talk about when and how I'm going to start measuring my impact and success so that I know I'm going in the right direction, right? So these are some basic things that I would really look at. And just to summarize it, we need to move away from trying to keep SIAM at an operational level. It needs to be a business partner, a business driver, and that's the kind of messaging the business case also needs to provide there.
Brilliantly summarized, Anand. So you've broken down the entire steps of creating a business case into a simpler step-by-step approach. And in this entire piece, few things that I would like to cover as we go through this podcast is what these drivers are usually when we are talking about business driver being different from our operational driver. Let's probably touch base on that. And we also talk about once you have established the drivers, identified and prioritized the problem that you want to solve, important piece that I want to really repeat for our audience for a business case is also very clearly lay out the benefits, the risk assessments, and the investment timelines along with it, which helps and ease the discussion. But I'm going to go back and ask you a very simple question, Anand. What is a typical investment range that we ask for?
That's quite interesting, and again, varies on multiple aspects, right? I know we saw the numbers upfront, which spoke about ranging between anywhere 5 to 15%.
Mhm.
But I would try to bring that gap down a little bit more closer and talk about 8 to 10% as part of your overall managed services. Yes, in certain cases, it could be much lesser, depending on the complexity as well as if it's only a cloud-only service provider, there's a
Yeah.
bunch of things already addressed, taken care of, and all of that, right? And also, some of the other key parameters that would influence the ask or the investment would be your SIAM model itself, right? The operating
Okay.
model in the sense, am I doing this in-house? Am I outsourcing the entire SIAM, which means that potentially the cost is going to be a lot more than when I might probably have a hybrid kind of a setup as well. So the SIAM model is going to primarily define the investment. And also, we encourage a lot of our audience really to understand that the investment is not only from a service provider point of view, but any component of SIAM that might potentially be kept in-house as well is something that you might want to consider as part of the SIAM model, right? Uh, Secondly, I think the complexity of the service provider landscape as well, right?
Mhm.
How diverse are these service providers, especially if it's a global customer who could have a lot of these service providers spread all over the place,
Yeah.
trying to bring in some level of standardization, integration, and at least to get that visibility of who's really doing what, and to be able to get our business priorities across to all of them is going to take a little bit more of an effort, right? So that could shoot up the cost or the investment that we are looking for. Another interesting aspect that sometimes we don't consider is the complexity of the IT landscape itself, right?
Right.
So, we're so focused on looking only at the tickets and you're trying to just add people to try and solve these aspects, but not really understanding whether a customer has only a cloud setup or a hybrid environment, where is their data hosted, where do they
Mhm.
have their uh, front-end users really trying to connect from, and how many service providers do they need to try
Mhm.
and really fulfill some of these end user requirements or customer requirements is also an aspect that needs to be considered, right? Couple of quick things again. I would also genuinely look at the tickets as well, just to get an idea of
Yeah.
how vulnerable the infrastructure might be, and also to understand who's really spending a lot of time in trying to resolve certain things. Uh, Tooling is another area. We have seen in many cases that trying to bring everybody onto a single integrated ITSM tool has been a challenge.
Mhm.
So that would also add a factor of how much investment we want.
Yeah.
Uh, just to summarize it, like lastly, for me again, is an important thing is OCM, right? An aspect that we did not consider again when solutioning organizational change management. There's got to be a percentage of that included as part of your SIAM investment.
Mhm.
Because look, you're probably asking for a business case or you're trying to put something together because you are in a bad state or not at the state where you want to be. So
Yeah.
for us to be able to have that journey and move towards the future or the end state that I want to get to is going to require that transformation, which needs to be managed by the OCM. So not necessarily that SIAM really needs to be driving it forefront, right? But that aspect of what's really changing, how do we get the entire set of stakeholders through this journey, and that OCM costing will also need to be factored in. So I think 8 to 10% seems reasonable, depending on a variety of customers that we might have worked with. But it could go down or a little higher depending on the complexity of all of these.
Thanks, Anand. And for the audience, there have been some really powerful pointers. I would request you to go back and play back a couple of these sections so that you can make notes. So coming back on these questions of when we were talking about what are the typical components of a business case, one of the points Anand mentioned, and Michelle, this is a question for you, was also about the roles and responsibility, which also relates to Anand's point of OCM. What do you think is the role of customers when we are talking about SIAM and effectively implementing it?
Yeah, I think from a roles point of view, I think Anand's spot on. The customer has a huge responsibility, and the OCM stuff that was mentioned is really considerable and something that often gets overlooked. But I think roles and definition of roles is super important, because if we don't clearly articulate them in a business case, that who does what in the SIAM ecosystem, you typically end up with confusion or duplication, or even worse, right? Gaps that no one takes responsibility for. And I guess one of the most damaging assumptions we see is that by outsourcing our service integration, the customer is also outsourcing accountability. That's often the way that it translates, but that's not how SIAM works at all. Because in reality, what we need is a really powerful customer presence. We need, the customer to acknowledge that they are going to retain ownership of the contracts, the commercial governance, the strategic direction, the business relationships. And so, they've got a really pivotal role to play. So we need to be clear about that. The service integrator, of course, is almost the orchestrator. I use this analogy a lot. They're managing the provider, they're looking at performance, they're coordinating processes, they're really there to sort of enable that end-to-end visibility. So, if we imagine the service integrator takes on this conductor kind of role, the customer pivotal, because they are the concert master. The first violinists, they lead from the front and they help set the tone. They've got a direct line to both the orchestra and the audience. And that's why I love that analogy. They're instrumental to the performance. So if the business case doesn't articulate the role of the customer clearly, the entire ecosystem suffers as a net result of that. You'll see internal teams, the customers' teams, ignoring the service integrator, external providers going directly to the customer, and the integrator is often sort of left struggling to assert influence that they've been empowered with. And that's not orchestration, that's chaos, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the customer sets the strategic direction, being the entire composer and conductor. Often the service integrator takes up the role of the conductor of the orchestra along with the customer, and they bring in the vision that they want the music to bring into their lives, right? So otherwise, a chaotic jam session. Now, speaking of this chaotic jam session, and perfectly, you brought in the analogy. This analogy varies based on industries, the customers, the personality, the persona within the customer we are talking to, right? And it also ties back to the drivers that they probably would need to see in the business case. So, going back to your point there on articulating it, the value proposition in the business case in their language. Speaking of that, what are those senior leaders looking for in a business case which would resonate to them in their language? Anand, if you can throw some examples, please.
Definitely. I think, as a bit of a repeat to what we spoke earlier.
Mhm.
The senior leaders or the executives or the guys who really have the money and are looking to make the investments,
Yep.
they are going to be focused on business outcomes, right? Uh, Honestly, they don't care if you're managing a million incidents or 10 incidents on a monthly basis, right? So they're going to be focused on business outcomes. They want to understand that any investment that they will make is helping the organization move forward towards their strategic goals, right? So this is where it becomes really important for SIAM service providers as well to understand the customer's business, right? Let's not
Yep.
just try to look only at the customer's IT, because IT is there just to try and support somebody's business, right? So the more we understand organization strategy, what are they looking at doing in the next 12 months, 18 months, or 2 years? If it's a financial customer, are they looking at increasing the number of branches, maybe, in some of the other countries?
Mhm.
If it's a retailer, are they looking at increasing the number of stores in areas where they previously have not done it, right?
Yep.
And which could, again, increase the number of service providers. So to try and get that kind of a language into these business cases and to talk about the ROI more on the business outcomes is what's going to be important, right? So what they will be interested in hearing is, am I, through service integration, am I going to be managing and governing my service providers better, right?
Mhm.
Are they going to improve their performance by X percentage than what it is today? Say, for example,
Yeah.
the fulfillment of a particular request might take 3 days today because it engages or involves 5 different service providers. As a
Mhm.
service integrator, if I'm able to translate that from a business perspective to an end user fulfillment perspective and try and say, look, we can streamline that entire value stream and be able to fulfill the same thing in a day instead of 3 days. So that's a business value, which is going to then in turn improve your NPS scores, right? So you're going to have a lot more of an impact to
Yeah.
the end users who are consuming the service, not just the IT personnel. So again, just to summarize that, try and focus on business outcomes, try and focus on better control, better governance, improve visibility of who's really doing what, right? There could be a ton of duplicity in the system, which can potentially be eliminated with better integration, better visibility, and things like that, right?
Mhm.
And remember, as companies and organizations grow, they're not just looking at cost savings, right? With
Yeah.
mergers, acquisitions, and all of it, they want to be able to try and simplify how the business runs and how IT supports that. Yeah. So as long as you're able to try and focus your ROI on these areas, I
Mhm.
think you're going to be making the people who are going to invest much more happy, and also tell them very clearly when are they going to start seeing the value, right? Uh,
Right.
if I am investing X amount of dollars, I want to be able to know that, look, is this something going to change in the next month, or do I have to wait for 12 months to really start seeing a change? So if I'm going to
Absolutely.
wait for 12 months to start seeing a change, then I'd rather go put this money somewhere else, right? So that's probably how you want to structure business outcomes, incremental business values, and a better control across the board, Neha.
Interesting. Incremental business value. So don't just go and talk about that you're going to integrate these many DevOps processes and pipelines, but talk about after integrating incrementally how you're going to improve their time to market in 6 months down the line to a year down the line. Do not just talk about that you're going to bring all the security and compliance process together and standardize that, but talk about how is it going to improve their compliance posture down the line. So brilliant thought there. And thank you so much for giving the incremental investment and return on value statement there, Anand. Um, I would like to now take that this is how we build the business case. These are the investment considerations. This is the value considerations for the customer. Gail, I'm going to probably put you on spot here and say that, let's say I am a consultant, the audience listening to our podcast are consultants or talking to the customer. They have listened to what we have said on the podcast. They've built a business case. Now they're presenting it to the customer, which they believe is really compelling. Uh, are there any things that they must consider depending on the understanding they have developed for the problem that they're trying to solve? And would it vary based on who they are talking to, which industry they are talking to, and the problem that they're trying to address?
Yeah, look, I think it is all about language, and we've talked a lot about making
Yeah.
sure we're presenting it in the business's terms, and solving the problems in their terms. So I think it is depending on who you're talking to as to how you present that message. Seeking clarification that they understand the value they're going to get, the risks that they face if they don't do this, and the value that's going to be delivered there. I think, again, we've talked a bit about not presenting in IT terms. Let's not talk uptime or availability. Those things don't mean anything to the business, but yes, we'll be able to go to market faster, or we'll be able to keep the community safe, or whatever industry we're in. And making sure that we've got alignment right throughout the business. So it doesn't matter whether we're talking to IT or to the executive or to finance or whoever we're talking to, it's to get everybody in alignment about why this thing is important and how it's going to help us all as a business. It's a really important tool for that.
Sure. So during this discussion, when we're presenting the business case to the business, to the customer, are there any examples or any thoughts where it may get derailed, or there are certain objections that are raised that you've commonly observed while the business case is presented to the customer?
I think for me, the biggest derailment that I've seen in the customers that I've worked with to date is that lack of alignment. So as a consultant, I'll be talking to the IT business about why they want to do SIAM, or why it's important to them. They may not have been talking to the rest of the business to bring them along on the journey, that we're going to be going down this path, and that's going to result in a whole lot of change, not just for IT, but for the rest of the business as well, in terms of the way we work. And these are the reasons that we're doing it. And with that investment and with that journey, as a business, we'll achieve these outcomes. So, the integrator comes in, they start to do their thing, and it starts to cause anxiousness and frustration within the business, because why are these people here? Why are they doing these things? Why do I have to change? That's probably the biggest derailment I've seen from a business case that's not articulated properly.
Right. And often even the IT departments are fragmented in larger organizations. So you might be
100%.
talking to one, and then the same value needs to be proposed and agreed with the other. Anand, have you seen any common derailment factors or objections from the customer?
Yes, I have. I've had some of these, I've been part of some of these unpleasant conversations. But again, to what Gail said, right? I think we will lose the attention of the audience if we're not able to connect and resonate with it, right? If I'm walking into a meeting and trying to sell very generic stuff that, hey, look, this could potentially be your benefit. I think this is something that we can help you with. So a lot of these words, even like I think, and we might be able to. So there's some of these the way you present as well. You could really lose your audience because it's going to be important to show your audience that you are confident of your analysis of what you have identified, the So try to be very specific again to the business outcomes. Try to be very specific and realistic about your timelines as well. It's important to be realistic. It's important to make the right kind of commitments, not try to shoot for the stars right at the beginning, right? And as long as you have supporting artifacts, you don't necessarily need to share the entire analysis with your leaders and the executives who might be funding it, but are able to relate and tell them, look, we are recommending this precisely to try and address this problem or to help you achieve this particular business outcome, right? And in so and so time, you are in a much better control of holding your audience's attention, right?
Absolutely.
And a couple of things that I've also seen, which kind of helps me especially, is to be able to try and categorize my benefits, right? Be it from a cost optimization point of view, from an agility point of view, from a better governance point of view, observability point of view, instead of just trying to list down 10 things, which again would not really resonate with your audience. Try to create 4 or 5 categories or buckets which will resonate with the business outcomes, and then try to structure your messaging accordingly to try and retain that attention span for a little longer. So if you're not specific, if you're not trying to give them the right details of the investments needed, the timelines that you want to be able to achieve, you will lose focus, right? I'm just gonna try and say something on a lighter note. I'm a huge comedy buff, right? And I hate horror. So imagine, a friend of mine trying to come and sell me, hey, look, I watched this horror movie over the weekend. I think you should really go watch it as well. It's not going to resonate with me, right? But as long as, understanding your audience and then trying to give them the messaging that they really need will help you have a better control. Of course, we're going to learn not the first time. As soon as you walk into a meeting, you will be able to understand your audience as well. So know who you're going to be presenting and try to make sure you're as specific as possible to try and prevent some of these derailment challenges there.
Sure. So do enough of homework and ask so what.
Spot on.
And absolutely, we would probably talk about after the podcast on how to sell a horror movie to you, Anand. But I really want to get the perspective from Michelle as well. Now, at the end of the day, when Michelle, we are proposing business case to the customer, they would look largely from these 3 aspects, apart from all the value that we'll provide, is how is this going to save money, or how is this going to help me make money, or how is this going to help me probably protect potential leakage of money in future, right? So these are the 3 things that they would look at. Do you see in the cost discussion becoming objection or derailment during the business case discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always does, doesn't it? It's so important, of course, and you can bring everything down to money. So I think that what we need to do is really bring it back. Gail and Ananda have expressed it beautifully that, we have to bring it back to a discussion of, look, what is the problem that we're trying to solve here?
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, financial elements are hugely important, but reset the room with that kind of question and refocus the dialogue on impact, not just implementation, and recognize, and tailor language and examples, to things that are super important. So if the financials are important, of course, give that focus, but it might not be the strongest factor. So, bring it back to the question, what's important? Is it quality? Is it strategic alignment? Is it operational efficiency? Or are we simply trying to, save money? So you're absolutely spot on, Neha. It does often come back to that, but let's not let it exclusively do so if there's a bigger concern that we think SIAM can address.
Yeah. Absolutely. I have not realized that we have already spent so much time discussing. Very interesting conversation today. Really good points. But as we have limited time, what I would really request is, uh, Michelle, then I'll come to you, Gail and Anand. If you can just give me one phrase or one sentence on how would you highlight today's discussion, and any key point that you want to share.
Yeah, of
Starting
course.
with you,
Thank
Michelle.
you. Of course. I said it before, don't treat your business case as a checkbox, treat it as an anchor. You know, if you can't clearly articulate what you're doing with your SIAM and what the value is that you're expecting, you're not ready to start it. So the best design models are going to fail if you disconnect from purpose. So get the business case right, and everything else, your measures, your structure, your relationships, all the great things we've talked about today, they'll flow from there.
Great. Gail?
For me, it's what Michelle said before. Use it as your compass, your guiding light for all parties involved, all stakeholders, and don't underestimate the organisational change involved. I think that's the thing that often gets left out because of cost and because of pain. But don't forget about it; it's important.
Brilliant. Anand?
Quite a few things we've spoken today, right? So I'm going to try and do a couple of things, do's, and a couple of things, don'ts, very quickly, right? First things first, keep it simple. That's the only way you're going to get everybody's attention, right? Two, do's, articulate your problems well and make sure you are specific to the customer, right? Know that one size does not fit all, and that's the truth. Yeah, so be specific. Then absolutely talk about the timeline and be very clear on how you're going to measure, right? So that you know you are going in the right direction. Quickly, a couple of don'ts, just a word of caution. We are ambitious, which is okay, but don't try to shoot for the stars right at the beginning, right? I again say, I think the incremental investment and incremental business value is the way to go. And do not overcommit right at the beginning. That's going to start creating a ton of trust issues, and that's not what you want when you're trying to partner with a customer. Yeah, so that's how I would
Brilliant.
go, Neha.
Brilliant. Okay. So takeaways for me: treat business case as compass, identify the North Star along with your customer, treat it as a compass, ensure that you do the so what test at every step. And as brilliantly highlighted by you as well, Anand, go for an incremental investment rather than going for a bulk investment right away at the beginning. So thank you so much. Brilliant conversation today with brilliant set of people. I really thank you, Gail, Anand, Michelle, for joining us today. And the audience, please keep listening to us. Though we are ending today's episode, the next episode we will be talking about SIAM and sustainability, a key aspects that becomes an important business drivers for the discussion with the customer. But for today's discussion, I enjoyed it thoroughly. I would like to see your comments. Please join us on Scopism community, and wherever you get to see this podcast, do share your comments. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day ahead.